Hey everybody, I am here with the man, the myth, the mustache, Nick Mueller from HD Retrovision. What's up, man?
How's it going, Bob?
Pretty good. I wanted you on because we haven't talked in a while and I thought it would be fun, but I also wanted to talk about a subject that's been bugging me for a while: clone companies. So
Hmm.
I have a seat. I'm sitting for this one. I usually stand. I want to be laid back. You're down in the stash. I'm going to crack myself open a beer that I've never tried before because while this is a very sad and serious subject, I want to try to make light of it at least a little bit. Have my HD Retrovision bottle opener.
It's
The
the
only
only way
times
to
I
do
use
it.
this is when I tried to do it one-handed and spilled a beer all over your office. That was
Yep.
very embarrassing.
Probably still hasn't been cleaned up.
Steve was not happy because you had like a meeting the next day and he didn't want it reeking of beer. Let's see
I
what
think
this
it's
is.
in the same spot now that's covered in metal shards from drilling into test fixture platforms. So I'm
Well,
sure it's all covered up by now.
there you go. That was a terrible pour. It's a brand new beer I'm trying, by the way. I've never tried this one before. I'm used to the
Allagash.
Allagash Stout. I was used to the mother's milk where you just turn it upside down and pour it hard. You know, that's the slogan. Wow.
A few years
Um,
ago, I was at that brewery. I was on like a New England road trip and went all the way to Acadia National Park and stopped at Allagash on the way back. It's a good brewery. You can't buy beer to drink there. You just get like uh, two free rounds. You could do like two just full pours, or you could do a flight. But it was pretty cool. Like they don't charge you for it at all.
well, I have three totals sitting next to me, including the one I just poured, and we might have to stop to get more if this topic bums me out. But I want to skip to the end. Um, well, first, I guess I'll set the stage and say that we'll talk about this, and then I want to catch up and talk about retro gaming, nerdy stuff, HD Retrovision stuff, and all of that afterwards. But I want to set the stage by skipping to the end and talking about how companies get away with cloning and why more people don't do anything about it. Because I think everything else that we talk about is going to be interesting to anybody who's ever been curious about the subject. But I think it's one of those things where everybody's going to be like, "But why? But I don't understand." But so I have unfortunately spent hours and hours and hours of my life on phone calls with lawyers about this stuff over the years. Starting in 2005, when the company I worked for owned a patent. They basically owned the patent for any time a computer was mounted behind a flat panel TV, which is clearly, purchased from a patent scalper and it never went anywhere. But we always used it as leverage to be like, well, we're the company with the patent, even though it didn't really actually mean anything. So, I mean, we're talking, while I'm not a lawyer and you should not take my advice as legal advice, I'm not just some chump guessing. Like, this is many hours of my life spent. And the one thing that 15 years ago and now is the same is that when you have a clone company that has cloned products and they're not in the US, I can't really speak for other countries and I sure as hell can't speak for China, but uh, companies that are not based in the US that are selling in the US, or at least not manufacturing in the US, um, you could absolutely start a lawsuit for cloning. And as part of that lawsuit, as long as you have a decent amount of proof, you could have any remaining shipments coming in held by the Customs and Border Patrol and not be allowed in. That process costs about $50,000 to start it. If you
Hmm.
continued the lawsuit and go through, it's an infinite amount of money depending on who you're suing. And that's one of the cases where the person with the most money wins almost always, just like most US lawsuits. But here's the real kicker in this, right? Let's say you have clone company X that, you know, blatantly reverse engineered something and now is throwing it in people's faces. And they're selling it, and you do that. You drop the 50 grand. You have it held at customs. You have them kicked off Amazon. As long as they have a second company and they're not manufacturing in the US, none of that matters. So all they do is write off whatever's held in customs and whatever Amazon had. If they're smart, they're not going to make $100,000 purchases at a time. They'll try to make smaller for this exact reason. And they take all of their overseas stock, pay to slap another label on it, start another LLC, and ship those through. And then just company X disappears and company Y appears selling the same exact thing. And you've lost your 50 grand. You have to start again. And there's nothing you could really do about that from a legal point of view. The only thing you could do is, if it's stuff like a small community like retro gaming, is let everybody know about it in a way where you're not going to get sued for slander, which is why I'm not going to be saying the names of any companies or not slandering anybody other than Voltar. And that's, we're going to be careful with this, but even then, it's just a matter of who has the most money wins that lawsuit, and I have none. So, I'm definitely not going down that road, but I definitely wanted to make sure that I skipped to the end and painted that very grim and realistic picture. And that's also why companies that are US based very often get paid under a different company name than they advertise under. There's another notorious clone company that did that, and they're affiliated with another that not even gaming related clone company, which is how they were able to learn all of these tricks. So even though they're based in the US and you could sue them as if they're a US entity, they're two companies. So the company where all of the legal ramifications would go through could just disappear, and there's nothing you could do about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is well, first of all, this is true for kind of all things: trademark enforcement, patent, copyright, any of those things. You're not going, if you don't have the stomach to spend the money to enforce it, then you really don't have ownership over that copyright or whatever it happens to be anyway. And then you're just playing a game of whack-a-mole, like you said. I think, kind of as you alluded to, the better strategy is word of mouth, and I think that's happened. I mean, like you said, in the retro gaming community to a decent amount, at least of those people who watch your show or on Twitter. You kind of have to self-police this behavior. It seems to me like the people, for the most part, who hear the story told fall down on the same side we do, where it's like, sure, you might be able to get that cool gaming product for, let's say, 75% of the price, but do you want new gaming products produced in the future? Is what you have to ask yourself, because those clone companies aren't making anything. They rely on having something to clone. And if you start watching people like, just to pick one, like Dan, who made the cool DC Digital, is it called now? If you want him to keep making products like that, and you support the clone company that makes the rip-off version, he's gonna walk away. So
yeah. So you touched upon a point that's a little bit even more depressing, I think, in that anytime you talk about this stuff, good people are going to listen and bad people are going to listen, and they're going to learn from it, and they're going to get better at doing terrible things. So leveraging social media is something these companies, especially the one that I'm thinking of, have already started to do. And, credit where credit's due, right? You know your worth when your enemies praise your architecture of aggression. Love that line, love that song, love the solo, but it hits hard sometimes in that one clone company has chosen to, only not all their products were cloned. And that's, it's another thing that we'll get to is, you hide behind a bunch of products that aren't clones so you could sneak your clones in there. But one company has tried to skirt through by sponsoring a lot of stuff in the gaming world, which, and I haven't even seen them. I haven't seen their name in years, so maybe they've already gone away. But the situation I'm certainly thinking of is a rough one, because how do a bunch of people stand up with their pitchforks and their torches and try to, you know, stand up to this company when there's a whole bunch of cool events being sponsored, and they're promoting a lot of good people just with the money made off of a clone product. So that's a rough one, and that's one that I don't even really know if there's a right answer to it, but they immediately get a bunch of allies because they're making a bunch of people's lives better, and while they're screwing over somebody else's. So that's a pretty smart tactic that these cloners could do. And it also prevents people like me from standing up and yelling, because then it's very easy for them to just send a legion of morons after me. Look, you know, you liked that event? Then, you know, this guy is trying to shut the event down. The other side is a little more crazy, and I'm shocked that nerds fall for it. Because if you're a retro gamer, generally speaking, you're probably a nerd like me and like you and like most of the people listening to this, who should have already been picking up on stuff like this. But the one tactic that really drove me crazy was the one notorious company started to realize, like, we're caught out. There's, you know, emails, screenshots, like we're definitely caught out. So they sent a bunch of products to drama channels, knowing that drama channels don't care about what's right or what's wrong. They want to be notorious. They want to be they want to be the shock value, and sent them a whole bunch of
what I would
products.
Put forward, though, is the YouTube channels, or even in the case you mentioned with the like a convention that they might sponsor and get their name on the masthead. Those people involved don't necessarily know that anything was done wrong to begin with.
That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I fall into this trap all the time where I kind of get myopic and think retro gaming Twitter is all of retro gaming. But then you realize when, you know, you go to a retro gaming convention and nobody's going to know who I am there. Like on Twitter, I know pretty much all the players in the retro gaming space. But once I'm at a convention, it's very humbling. Nobody knows me. Like, we are small potatoes in that the entire, you know, population of people who are into this hobby. You're probably way better known than I am, but I would still argue that the audience of people that don't know you is bigger than the people who do.
100%, yes.
So those people aren't paying attention. They just don't know that company XYZ is taking someone's design and making their own version of it. They just see the name on the masthead. Or
yeah, see, this is why I'm so glad I'm doing this with you and not just doing a video by myself, because I would have never realized that was coming out wrong until you brought that up. But so thank you. But yeah, scenario number one, you're 100% right. People don't know, and why would they know that anything wrong is happening? It just looks like a positive situation. Scenario number two is annoying as hell, though. You know, you have a person or people that want to be notorious that comes out and says, this company is not a clone company. They got a bad rap because somebody wanted more money for a sponsorship, so now they lied and said they're a clone company. And no, like, the fact that people believe that stuff is gross to me, but the fact that people believe the earth is flat and that, you know, reptilian aliens are controlling our politicians, it's one of the, you know, you can't, like, a person smart, people are stupid. Tommy Lee Jones said it best in Men in Black, but, like, that does frustrate me, because that absolutely gives these clone companies a platform to say, we're not a clone company. This is all a bunch of lies. And look, here's 4 or 5 videos from different people proving that we are a good company with good things. And that's up to us. That is absolutely up to us to recognize who are the people talking about these things. Because it's like, you know, if I were to make a video about, like, why the N64 is the greatest console of all time, half the retro gaming world would stand up and be like, shut up, Bob. This isn't your favorite console. You shouldn't be talking about this. Like, it's pretty obvious once you get to know, even through their videos and their social media and their writing or whatever else, you know, you should know who's a level of expertise is what. And it is very frustrating to see some of the clone companies leverage that, and just leverage typical social media tricks. You know, just the very basic trying to make people look stupid. You know, a good liar will always be believed over just somebody telling the truth. Always, historically, since freaking cavemen days.
Yeah, and, you know, a big problem is our megaphones only reach so far.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just rehashing the same thing, but you have a YouTube audience. It's big, but unless you move to other places than YouTube, um, do other things, there are just segments of audience that you're not going to ever hit. Just they don't go to YouTube to watch retro gaming updates, right? Their retro gaming experience is entirely watching people play on Twitch and speed run games. That's their retro gaming experience. And if you're not doing that, you're not reaching them. And when
Yeah.
they go to a convention and see a cool little dongle that makes console Z output HDMI in 4K, they're just going to read that and say, that is really cool. I'm buying it.
And on the flip side of that too, if I or anybody else goes around and goes into people's Twitch streams and be like, "You're using a clone product," like, we're the assholes at that point, because
oh yeah, of course,
they don't know.
I'm not saying you should.
Most of the 99% of the people, if not more than that, who buy this stuff have no idea it's a clone product, or think they're buying the original. Like, they don't even know that there's choices. They just saw this one on whatever store that they go to, and it wasn't an obvious one, and like. Yeah, so it's really hard to get the word out there, and it's even harder to get the word out there when people clone for a living and they know all the tricks. They know how to light people up on social media. They know how to clone only a piece of a product. The important part, the part that takes all the money and the time for R&D, and change other stuff and be like, this isn't a clone product. Look how much different it looks. Like, so it's frustrating. And, I'm trying to get all the really negative stuff out first, so we can just get that over with, and then start climbing up a more positive hill. But am I missing anything else from like the really bad stuff? Why we could almost never combat this? Why they continue to get products out there using their their lies and their bullshit and leveraging other people? And am I missing anything that you could think of for the really bad stuff before we start climbing up to less depressing territory?
I think one other thing is that they do have a bit of a pricing advantage, right? When you're talking about boutique products like the ones we make, for example, like they are priced what an average person would look at and be like, $60 for a cable. I'm not paying $60 for a cable. And it's totally understandable. And so we're a clone company to come in who's got, a much bigger lineup of products than us, employs more people.
And would have no problem making an unshielded garbage cable that looks like
yours. Make a lower quality version, but close enough version of ours. They can go to any number of the retro gaming resale stores and get their product on the shelves. Because they can offer it at a much lower price point. The gaming stores know they can move them much faster. There's a lot more people going in to buy a $20 cable for your N64 than there are $60 cables.
Yeah.
And so they think about that. They don't want to have like a stack of HD Retrovision cables just sitting there not moving. And so we don't end up in most retail stores for
yeah. And on top of that too, if you've cloned a product, your investment is whatever it took to clone it. So if you just spent thousands of dollars on an HDMI analyzer, an oscilloscope, 20 different prototype revisions, and you're out just thousands, and you need to factor that in. And most people in smaller companies, most people generally don't factor enough of that in. They want to keep the price down, so they shortchange themselves. You have a company that comes in that's already an expert in cloning, that already knows all the tricks we just talked about, come in, clone it, and make it hypothetically exactly the same quality as the original, and maybe change the color of the case because people want pink ones, so let's make a pink one. I'm making that up, but you could absolutely sell a product infinitely cheaper because you don't have that cost, because you could pump them out in runs of 10,000, not 1,000, and that just sucks. It just there's no other way to put it.
along those same lines, when you have, let's say a person gets a bad, you know, something went wrong when producing the product. The chips didn't get soldered right, whatever. Um, a company like HD Retrovision, when we were first starting out, we were addressing all of those issues like with customers directly, right? They'd submit a support ticket. A lot of times the cable would get mailed back to Steve. He's like digging, trying to, figure out what went wrong. A lot of time and money goes into that because if we start having problems with our cables, and it can't be fixed, or we can't figure out what's causing it, we start taking large financial losses. Like one cable goes garbage, oh, there goes the profit from the next two cables you sell, type of thing. Whereas a lot of these clone companies, they don't, most of them probably don't even know how to fix or triage any of these issues, but they're making the product at such a low price and such a high margin that they're just going to send you a new one, right?
Or just send you your money back and say, you know what, keep it for free. Yeah. We don't care.
Yeah. So they're not going to spend the time and money on that type of stuff. So that's just kind of another disadvantage. But at the same token, would you rather buy your product from a company that knew how the thing they made worked? I think works in the non-cloner advantage. But,
Yeah. Depending on the product, because I do think that there is a place for lower end stuff. Like these headphones I'm using are absolute garbage. Yeah. They were like $8. They're terrible, but they're the right color. I could kind of, they're in ear. And I bought like,
and when they go bad, you're not going to send an email to customer support and try to get a new pair. You're just going to go buy a new one.
And maybe they're clones, or maybe they're just low quality ones. But then I got, the headphones I've been using for a while to mix audio when I was recording, to double check all these podcasts. And I would not ever buy a knockoff or a low end version of that, because I need the good ones and I want the good ones. For this, I don't really care. So I guess that's a perfect segue into something else I wanted to talk about, and starting the up climb to be less depressing here is what's not cloning. And I would just like to say that we should put open source aside and talk about that afterwards. So because that's definitely a conversation by itself. But what's a couple of examples or a description of what's not cloning, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the open source one is kind of the most obvious one. I mean, there are things, my brain immediately goes to cables for obvious reasons. But there are things that are not like innovations that are not necessarily cloning, right? So Retrobit makes a composite video cable for Super Nintendo, say. Retrobit's not cloning composite cables because, I don't know, pick another company that makes cables.
Because Nintendo's
already has
one,
I mean, there's no innovation there. So, I mean, when companies do that, I'm not considering that cloning.
So to stick with cables then, to make that easier. So if I were to go out and say, hey, I took an off-the-shelf basic RGB to component video circuit that I lifted off of a website legally, I'm going to get some low-quality cable. I'm going to do the cheapest overmold possible, and I'm going to sell them as, Bob's component cable solution. And I'm going to advertise them as a cheap, less performing alternative to the HD Retrovision cables. And I say, hey, these things are $4.99 each, and they're better than composite, probably. And they'll work with the open source scan converter, so you don't going to get a converter for that. You can go right in. But if you want quality, you pay for the other ones. And if you just want something to work, you buy these. That's not cloning at all. That's not even a dick move. That's a perfectly fine way to go about doing something.
Sure.
But cloning would be taking yours apart, reverse engineering the exact circuit that's on there, then doing an overmold that looks almost identical, and getting cables that look almost identical, and selling them as Bob D Retrovision cables or something.
Yeah, that there's a big distinction there for sure. There's some nuances there. For example, I kind of wish that we had gone down the route of a design patent on the cables. So the difference there from a regular patent is you're just really patenting kind of the form and function of something. So in hindsight, I wish we had kind of had a patent on the design of like kind of, the short length of cable into a conversion box that's overmolded and then breaks out signal. Like that design obviously got replicated or in some ways cloned by everybody else. I'm pretty sure we were the first people to do that. And then, Hyperkin made their cables for like HDMI versions, but it's all that same, function of like
that does absolutely
cable into
go back
box.
to the lawsuit thing though, where you would have to,
Yeah.
you would
Yeah,
have
we
to
would have
fight
had to
that in
defend
court,
it.
and they
Yeah.
just, by the way, I'm not accusing Hyperkin of stealing. I said I would not say names.
No.
Like, I don't think they did. You didn't say they did. Just want to be clear about that. But like,
no, I'm giving an example of like, had we had a trademark or a design patent on that.
But if that were the case, all Hyperkin
protected us
could
if
do,
we wanted to defend it.
Yeah, but if that were the case, all Hyperkin would do is dump off all the stock of the cables, put the converter circuit at the end of the cable, so it's the opposite of yours, a long cable with the circuit at the end, which is not as good, but so yeah, sorry to pick on you, Hyperkin. I throw shade your way, but not this time. But like yeah, I mean, all they'd have to do if you even called them out, or they could look at you and say, our legal budget is bigger than your entire yearly revenue.
Sure.
Take us to court, see what you're going to do. So, and that's something that I spent a lot of time talking about in, both for RetroRGB related things and in the other company, is that, like, technically speaking, the company I worked for could have sued Apple for their iPad, or could have sued, for any all-in-one computer, but they weren't that dumb. They bought the patent just to be able to be like, we're the inventors of this, so we could, they used it for marketing, and that's, totally fine. They never pinned somebody into a corner with it, but it was very clear that you're not going to win any of those lawsuits.
Yeah, I think, just to put a bow on my point there, to be very clear with what I was saying, and I just picked Hyperkin because they're another company that manufactures cables. Had somebody come, like, let's say we had gotten that patent and somebody did what you said, your first example, which was your Bob, you downloaded a circuit off the internet, you slapped an overmold on it and threw some cables. We could have easily argued, like, this is confusing the consumers. We have this design patent that says, no, you cannot just go and make a component cable in this form function because that's our thing. That's like how people know us. That in that case, that would have, been a more nuanced version of this, but the general principle of that example is, no, I wouldn't consider that cloning. And you could go do that right now if you want.
Yeah, so
millions of bucks.
That leads us to something that I've never fully understood, and I don't know if there is a way to fully understand this, but clean room reverse engineering. And I guess the best example that we could give for this podcast would be how Electronic Arts reverse engineered the Sega Genesis security. So they were able to make their own cartridges for it, and they made different shape cartridges. So they couldn't get sued because it's a different thing, and you don't need to license it from Sega to do that. I think that's the one that everybody listening to this might remember, or if you don't, it's a great story, so definitely look up one of the documentaries that talks about it. But I don't fully understand the difference, because I get that they changed the cartridge shape to not confuse the customer. This is not an officially licensed by Sega product, but by reverse engineering something in a way where you're not stealing any of their original code, aren't you still somehow hacking and cracking that code. You know, where do you know anything about that? Do you have any insight into that?
I'm definitely not an expert on that in particular. There are things that are more protected in intellectual property than others. So, you know, you can't just say like nobody can build this circuit consisting of a two capacitors, a resistor, and a diode here. Like,
because that's
there are
off the
limits
shelf
to
parts that have no
right.
limitation.
But say you imagine you constructed a brand new mesh of putting those parts together. You still aren't going to be able to protect that, right?
Mm-hmm. The Atari 2600 fell under that because there was really no proprietary chips on there. You could go into electronics warehouses back in the day and buy every one of those and just redesign your motherboard around it and plug all those parts in. And that's why there was a bunch of 2600 clones that you could do nothing about. That's why you could play a 2600 cartridge through a ColecoVision through that adapter.
Yeah, I mean, just like to take like that example to like a really stupid extreme, like imagine you just like built this like parallel array of 200 resistors of different values. No, you could say nobody's ever put these 200 resistors in parallel before. This is my thing, and now nobody else can do this ever again. Doesn't work like that. So to go back to your clean room argument, I mean, if you can kind of deduce circuit components and how they may be arranged just by probing, I don't know if there's a legal issue that can come from that.
There doesn't seem to be. In retro gaming, that certainly happened with some handheld screens, where companies came about with the exact same thing, with the exact same features, but they never used secure encrypted code. They were probing all the inputs and outputs, and they kind of figured out what happened. The GC Video project is a perfect example of this. Nobody stole Nintendo's code. Oh, well, nobody. It was Ingo Korb that did it. One person. That should get some credit right there. But like, Ingo didn't steal Nintendo's code. This was long before the source code leaks. He sat there by his own admission and just probed all of the signals on the inputs and outputs and figured out what was happening. You know, when I saw this on that side, then, you know, this thing happened on the other side, and was able to make a chip to recreate those. So that's not cloning. That's reverse engineering based on the signals around it. And that's still kind of a gray area to me, because like if you do that to a Nintendo cable that's no longer being manufactured, that they don't, you know, they're not making any money off of anyway, I would never describe that as cloning. I would describe that as like a new product. But like if HD Retrovision came out with the first and only ever GameCube HDMI cable and somebody did the same exact thing, and technically that's not cloning, but that's a huge douchebag move.
Right. I mean, of course. So I think whether something is cloning or not is a gray definition and doesn't really matter. I think the heart of what you're asking is it legal and is it moral? And I think there's a lot of cases where it's plenty legal and morally dubious at best. And you can span the whole spectrum there, right? You can take, you know, boutique company, you know, X, who just like three guys who make cool products for retro games, and their circuits are kind of easy to look at, and then put a multimeter to deduce part values, and then go make your own. You can do that. Is it morally acceptable? In my opinion, no. But if take the other end, where it's Nintendo doesn't make these GameCube cables anymore, and there's a demand for them, and somebody goes and does that, I have less of an issue with that. I mean, on the moral grounds,
Yeah, you know, you
both may be perfectly legal, but I feel differently about
you
them.
bring up a great point, and I was joking about shitting on Voltar, but now this is actually a perfect example in that um, one of Voltar's products got cloned in that exact manner. In that the shape was a little bit different, so that you can't say, "Oh, you have a unique shape." I don't think it was anyway, but it was the exact same layout. But there's no that's not technically legally that's not cloning because it's just an array of parts in a certain order. That notorious cloner who's just got the worst reputation for doing this also cloned the exact revision number, which was funny. But, and then sold them at a less than Voltar's because he didn't have to spend, hundreds of hours perfecting the signal. He just had to spend a couple hours reverse engineering what Voltar did. And that's really shitty. However, we ran into somebody at an expo a couple of years ago that was like, I've wanted to get into board design. I really didn't know what to do. So I bought a couple of Voltar's boards. I reverse engineered them. I plugged them into my consoles. And then by doing that, I learned how to create circuits. So then I looked around and saw that I had two consoles that nobody had ever made an RGB bypass for. So I measured the values, I got everything right, and I used what I learned from the cloning to make a board that I am selling. And I remember, I don't want to speak for him, but I remember telling Voltar that story, and he loved that story because person number two didn't sell any of the clone boards. And in fact, purchased Voltar's boards from him. So like Voltar got the sale, the person learned how to do board layouts and learned how to get better at this stuff, and then ended up making products that no one else had made before. So all of it was legal, but it was also morally freaking awesome. Like everybody kind of won when that one. So bringing up the moral aspect is certainly interesting, and that you just have to kind of decide what kind of person you are depending on how you want to look at things like that.
Yeah, and I think it's obvious that those things don't have to align with the law, as is typically the case. There are things that are illegal and I consider perfectly fine to do, and there are things that are completely legal, and I'm like, I would not feel good about doing that. So
yeah, that's something retro gamers all deal with. I have never and will never in my life feel guilty about purchasing something and then making a copy of it for me. Now, if I purchased something, made a copy of it, and sold it, I'm a giant piece of shit. But only making a copy for me. So, like, I have a Blu-ray that I love, so I'm going to rip it to my server so that I could decide to watch it on any TV in my house without getting my fat ass up off the couch to find the disc, or moving the disc player because I only have one because no one uses discs anymore. Like, I have zero moral issues with that, even though technically it's breaking copyright encryption and it's technically illegal. I would be willing to bet that I could, call up the head of the RIAA or something and tell them I'm doing that, and they'll be like, stop wasting my time. Like, they don't even really care, even though technically it's illegal. So yeah, that's always an interesting thing that retro gamers have to deal with, and I'm glad in many ways that we're dirty pirates for stuff like that, because there's just a lot of stuff that would have never been saved if we weren't. Just don't profit off of other people's stuff. Pretty obvious one.
yeah, ROMs is one of those cases where you have a diverse range of opinions on the moral aspect of it, and sometimes it gets disguised by this debate over whether it's legal or not.
Yeah. That's
I mean, there are people who are perfectly fine popping in a ROM cart that has every single game ever made for a console that they downloaded and didn't pay for, and they'll make the argument that nobody's getting hurt, they don't make this anymore, blah blah blah. Then on the other side, you have the people who will be saying, yeah, but you're infringing on Nintendo's IP, and you don't know what in the future Nintendo wants to do with how they want to make money off of Super Mario, because they really want to sell it to you on the 20th console digital platform. And those people they're not any more right or wrong than the others. It's just how you feel morally about it. And legally, I think it's pretty clear that you're breaking the law. But
Yeah. I think this is a good segue over to open source, though, because here's another scenario in which there are pretty clear rules, but this is another one where the clone companies get to manipulate how they present this to people. And one of the most disgusting things I see on a regular basis is they're not a clone company, that's an open source project. Well, there's so first I got to say I'm not smart enough to go down that road, which is why I already did a podcast with Renee, Tianfong, and Ratboy about this a while back. So if anybody's interested in the details of open source, I really enjoyed that podcast, and everybody I know that's an open source enthusiast said we did a decent job, which is a really big compliment because those are also some pretty harsh critics. So uh, just skipping to the end of that podcast to say that there are rules that are very clearly set in most cases, and then there are rules that sometimes say there are no rules, just don't bug me. Which, if that's the easy one, if somebody uses one of those licenses, anybody could do anything, and it's not cloning. Period. End of discussion. That's it. However, there's other licenses that you need to follow, and if you don't, it's legally just as bad as cloning. Now, once again, you'd have to fight it in court. You're not going to win. It's just the way life is. But one of the more interesting ones that I've stumbled across are people who've open sourced their projects under a license that says, basically, I'm doing this to make sure this product lives past me. Do not bug me for support. Don't, just take it and use it as is. You could sell it if you want. If you make any changes to the project, you have to republish those, and that's it. And I've seen companies pick up and manufacture them with logos that are almost the same, with manuals that are not part of the open source license, with the same wording in it, the same links, the same everything else. I mean, and then sending people to the original company for support when there are problems with those. And yes, the root product.
Whatever product could you be talking about, Bob?
Believe it or not, Nick, there's at least 4 that are bouncing through my head right now, honestly. But
there's one key one that's bouncing in mine, but
but that's cloning. Period. That is, yes, the design of the product that you have had manufactured is an open source product, but the way you're going about doing it is against the rules. Maybe cloning technically isn't then the right answer, but that is illegal, and you're not going to win, but it is.
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself a bit of an open source skeptic, and to clarify what I mean by that is, I think it really should just be pretty black or white if you're going to open source something, just like fully free domain it or not, because all of that stuff in the middle where there's these little quirks to the license, like, you have to contribute your changes back to open source, or if you're going to sell this, you have to acknowledge the original project. All that stuff is almost nearly unenforceable. Like, you're just not going to spend the time on chasing people down. Like,
so you make a solid point, but there's 2 ways to look at that. From an enforcement point of view, yeah, don't ever add a license because you think that you could enforce that license. In a perfect world, you could, but that's just not it. Unless you have $1 billion in the bank, so you can just start suing a bunch of people. That's it. But if you want to create a license so that you could collaborate in a very specific way with other people who want to follow the rules, then yes, absolutely. Because while this is an uncharacteristically negative podcast for me, the truth is that there's just shitloads of really awesome people out there that are like, oh, I want to work with this project. How can I? Oh, it's this license? All right, cool. I'll send you everything I got. Oh, it's that license? I'll do my thing and I'll reopen it when I'm done later. Like, if you want to if you just want to interact with people in a specific way, yeah, those licenses are amazing. But there's almost zero protection in real life, like
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
illegal
at
to
that
punch
point,
somebody in
it's
the face, but how am I ever going to stop you from walking up and punching me in the face? You know what I mean? There's real life repercussions.
yeah. At that point, what you're describing is really not a license. It's just kind of a friendly agreement, right? You're putting into your product a little text file that says, "Hey, it'd be really cool if anytime you worked on this, you contributed it back to the repository."
Yeah, but there's a lot
The
of
fact
really
that it's
good
a
people that look for that, though.
yeah, no, I'm
Yeah.
not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying like it's another step to call that a
Oh,
license,
yeah, it's
you know,
fair.
because then you're getting to the point where are you legally chasing down people who are not following the license? Like the good actors are going to be good actors. So if you request them to, you know, keep contributing, they'll do it, whether it's a license or not.
Yeah, but I do, since this is such a bummer of a podcast, I do want to tell a story that I know a couple of different stores that sell open source projects, but they want to be known as the stores that do it right. They don't have to. No
Hmm.
one's going to shut them down, but they want to be known. So they make a big deal about doing everything by the book, contacting the developers. That all of them have had developers be like, I told you I don't care. Do what you want." And they still did it anyway because it was just they wanted to be the people that did the right thing. And very often that ended up in cool collaborations, extensions of the product, people that have never been involved but
Hmm.
working together because now there's set terms on how we work together on this. So yeah, not zero use for enforcement, but I do appreciate when people take the time to set goals and to set the terms for collaboration terms, I guess is the real life
Hmm.
description of what those things are, because it sucks, but there's no way, unless it's a huge company open sources something, you're not gonna have to, nothing's happening from that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely really good use cases for open source, and I didn't mean to imply that I'm opposed to open source when I said skeptic. It's mostly with respect to the enforceability of these
Yeah.
GPL and all the those other different kinds of licenses, MIT and all that
No, you
stuff.
made it pretty clear at the end. You walked into
But
that. You
sure,
walked into that,
yeah.
not knowing where you were going with that, but you made it clear at the end. I agree with you. The one thing I will add, and maybe so many people when they lose an argument with me throw the word elitist around because they think that that'll make me look bad. Like kind of like I'm not a poopy head, you're a poopy head. They're like one of those. This might actually be an elitist thing to say, and I'm totally okay with it. But generally speaking, if you're buying parts from somebody that is ignoring all of these open source rules and they're just manufacturing stuff, knowing that no one's going to sue them because they don't have the budget, so they're cloning the manual. They're just taking the design and manufacturing them. They have generally no understanding of what goes into it. They're not talking to the developers. They're not talking to
Hmm.
their peers because nobody wants to talk to a dirty cloner other than other dirty cloners that are not involved in that. So it is very common to see I'll use the word cloned, even though technically it might not be, but it's common to see a cloned product that are using good components, good resistors, good capacitors that are made from a good shop, but without anybody that knows what they're doing overseeing the process. So the QA isn't there. All of the double checking the layout isn't there, and they'll miss things. And of course, there's always the garbage clones too that take 1% resistors and swap them with 10% resistors. But even on the side that they do a decent job, because they're not working with the people that are around the project, they end up accidentally making a low quality version. So I just had somebody contact me the other day about something that they bought, and I've had other people buy the exact same clone product, not knowing it's a clone product, and it worked totally fine, and this one didn't. So what's the likelihood? Is it the likelihood that they really got one of the 1% of the lemons? Or is the likelihood that no one really knows how to manufacture that product correctly from that clone company, and it's not 1%, it's 10% are failing because they're just like, we followed the open source license, fire out 10,000 of them and sell them for $1 a piece. So Do you disagree? Am I wrong? Am I
Yeah, I
too
mean,
pompous in that opinion? I'm always open to change my opinion if if something's presented.
uh, no, you're not wrong. I think that's um, generally the case, and with a lot of open source stuff, as you mentioned, it's all collaborative. Like that's one of the benefits to doing something open source, right? You draw on this community. I think about the Mister project, for example, and I don't know what license that operates under, but there's not one person that knows how all the cores in Mister are work. There's like 1,400 different developers for
So
this
that's an
project at
excellent,
this
excellent
point.
example, because if you narrow that project down to just the I/O board for the sake of this conversation, anybody that's part of the core group of people that enjoys working together can make a really high quality I/O board. I could make 3 of them in my house really high quality. Somebody could make 3,000 of them at a manufacturer. Excuse me. But there are absolutely garbage I/O boards, garbage RAM boards, garbage anything made for them from people saying, Mister's getting popular. It's an open source project. Files are up. Let me just make them. I think I didn't even realize that until you said it, but that is the perfect, example of what I was just talking about. In that, yeah, there's a million people involved, but if you step up and you're like, hey, I want to make something awesome. I want to do it right. What's everybody working on? This is the latest rev, but is there something else coming? What are you all seeing in manufacturing? People will help because it is open source. Nobody owns the project, from that perspective on it. So yeah, thank you. That's the perfect example.
But just to rain on your parade for a second, one of the problems with nobody owning the project is there's nobody to care enough to sue if one of the clone companies you refer to, imagine they packaged up their own all-in-one console, the Cubitron 9000. It was just a little box that didn't use the DE10 Nano, but lifted all of the code that all these guys were contributing to this Mister project. They just take all that code and dump it into their Cubitron and start selling it as the all-in-one solution. Is there anyone in the community that would spend the resources to fight
we'll
that?
probably find out in about a year. I'm going to be very careful with what I say, and if I decide to be a bitch about it, maybe I'll just delete this out. But there is somebody who's trying to clone Mister, trying to get it mass produced, trying to claim they're following the rules, but every logical person seeing this knows there's something else going on. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope that I am, I will publicly beg for forgiveness for this team or person or whatever when this is released. I hope it's somebody that says, hey, here's my fork of the project. Here's all of the things that we did contributed back. We're up to the license. Anything we add, we'll give back. But I think one part or all of Mister is in the midst of being cloned from the exact nefarious type of things that we're talking about. And I'm very interested to see what people are going to say. Because if it's like
Well, I started that off, by the way, saying I don't know what the license is on Mister. So maybe that's totally fine.
I think it's everything involved in Mister has to be open source. Everything. If you're using anything off of that GitHub, a piece of hardware, a piece of software, if it's on that and that's where you got it from, it's got to remain open. Now, please don't quote me on that. It is.
That doesn't mean you can't sell it as a commercial product.
No, it doesn't. But if you change a whole bunch of stuff about it and you take all the cores and you don't credit anybody or you just call it Mr. 2 but you haven't contributed back, that's against the rules. And I think that might be happening as we speak. Once again, I hope I'm wrong. I hope if this even happens that everything's by the book, and I hope everybody in the community goes, oh, this was the right move. Cool. Let's do this too, as well as but I think we're going to see that next year, and I think we'll find out what happens. And I also think price is going to be a huge factor, because if somebody comes out with a clone that's not following the rules, that's $1,000, I think everybody's going to be like, burn them to the ground, like light them all up on, on all social media. But if it's $100 Mister,
but how else will you get it? How else will you get a Mister that's reference quality?
Once again, I need to be very careful on how I word this, but the plan was to do something that I looked into. I did it different. I contacted people from the Mister team. I asked their opinions. Once I found out the price tag, I was like, ugh. But basically make your own DE10. So it's the same main processor, very similar to everything else, but you allow access to all of the pins on it, meaning no more snack adapters needed, no more lots of stuff. You could do a lot more, change the ARM processor to a much more powerful one. So most of the code would just work. And the number one reason that everybody told me that, yes, it could be done. And yeah, people, as long as you were good, did right about it. My idea was actually to start, and by the way, if anybody wants to steal this idea, please do. But my idea was to start a not-for-profit company that only made like our version of the DE10 in quantity, and then basically was like, hey, all Mr. people, here's your new dev platform. We can guarantee it as long as the chip's out. The number one setback to that, forget about egos and infighting or any of the other bad things that could happen. The number one setback is doing a proper layout of a board like that takes an expert. And a prototype is like 40 or 50 grand for one at the cheapest. And you're most likely, with the best minds in the world making this, going to need 2 prototypes. And you're going to need somebody to put all the money in. So you basically need to walk in with like $500,000 to start to make something that may or may not take off in the community. People might just be like, I'll stick with the D10. It's $8 cheaper or something like that, So that's why I decided to not go after funding and to not go after it, because there was just too much. It was too big of an ask from too many people. So if this thing that I'm talking about does that, then it's actually an amazing thing that we should all be celebrating. But I don't think that's my spidey sense immediately went up when I started hearing what was going on, and I was like, this is gonna be some bullshit, isn't it? It's gonna be like the At Games Genesis.
Well, for the record, Bob has not told me anything about what he's talking about, so I am completely
I will tell
in
you
the dark.
afterwards. In fact, there's a very select group of people that I had to trust with this, because this is one of those things where it's like, if it does turn out to be good, I would be the biggest douche on the planet for saying this. And if it turns out to be as bad as I think, they would easily drop $100 grand to just sue everybody. They'll Tommy Tallarico the shit out of it and just try to destroy anybody that stands in their way. I'll probably get sued for saying that too, but
just for saying his name.
I'm surprised he hasn't just appeared alongside me with some NFT cards or some whatever the shit that they're selling is now, but
or with a lawyer to hand you a. Did his console ever come out?
But yeah, so I guess to swing back around and sum all this stuff up, you got to, you can't ever blame anybody else or yourself if you bought something that's a clone that you didn't know was a clone. And at the same time, if you go out there in the scenario that we talked about before, the Bob D Retrovision cables that are admittedly very low quality versions of that, but not cloned, like my headphones, like if you just want to buy a cheap thing, then you shouldn't feel guilty about that either. I don't know how you should feel if there's like Beats headphones knockoffs. That's another gray area that I don't know, because it's both illegal and morally wrong, but is anybody really losing sleep over a Beats clone or something? I don't know. You'll have to make that decision on your own. But I would never shame anybody for buying it by accident or just buying low quality versions because that's what fit their needs at the moment, or buying both. Obviously, I've got a million examples of that, but it just make the effort if you're talking about low quantity niche market things where it's a small group of people working on it. Take the time to just be like, hey, is this right? And I would say that about anything. I mean, how many poor people out there bought the Pound cable? That's not a clone of anything. It's just a giant piece of shit that you've wasted your money on. So it's like, take the time to just research something and hope that you've stumbled across the right reviewer and not the shill that's going to be like, yeah, there's no lag in this can. This is a lag-free can. Feels like there's no lag in here. Like, take the time. And it sucks because you shouldn't have to do that. You should just be able to go online and pick something, but that's not really how life works.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all kind of centers around the same problem we've been talking the whole time. Like, there is a set of people that care very intensely about this, and most of people, it doesn't cross their mind for a second. So in our orbit, who are really into getting the best quality out of their gaming experience, they are going to put in the time on that. And for some other thing in their life, they're walking down Walmart and they pick up a clone pillow, a clone my pillow, or whatever. They don't care for a second, right? So everyone's got the things in their life that they care really passionately about, and for us, it's retro gaming. And so, when we see it happen in our space, it matters a lot to us. But I'm sure you don't have the energy to think about that for everything in your life.
I totally do.
Oh man, this toothbrush that I bought, did I get the one that the original person who came up with the design of this best toothbrush ever, or am I buying the clone?
I'm totally that weirdo because while I like retro games a lot, my real passion is creative hardware engineering, which is, anybody that reads or listens or whatever RetroRGB would totally be like, oh yeah, that makes sense now. So I within reason, I absolutely do think of that. Like, I have, maybe they're clones. I have an $18 headset microphone streamer thing that I bought that maybe it's a clone, maybe it's a clean room reverse engineering, maybe it's the Bob D Retrovision example, but it's totally fine and it does everything I need and I don't feel bad about that. But signature headphones, I would never buy unless I was like, well, what is this? Where is this coming from? I legit, you make fun of me all you want, Nick, I deserve this one. When the CEO of Behringer came out and said, hardware's hardware, no one should own a patent on that, we clone everything, there's nothing you could do about it, I unplugged that from my computer, I put it in the box, and I ordered the Motu M4, which I'm using now, which is infinitely better anyway, by the way. But yeah, I absolutely do. I'm just like, wow, fuck that guy. I already paid for it, so I'm not going to throw it in the garbage. That would just be stupid. But that's my spare that'll only be used if I have to, because screw that, no way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an individual decision on where you're gonna put your time and energy. Most people are just gonna pick the few things, whether it be the headphones or their gaming cables or whatever it is. You're gonna take the time to find out: am I getting the best thing for this? Am I getting the one that from the boutique company that I want to support?
You're definitely right, though.
But for other things,
yeah, as you're explaining this, I'm starting to realize, wait a minute, I just bought a whole bunch of light switches for my house for $1.99 each. It's probably a clone, huh? $1.99. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, but those are silly examples. The toothbrush and the light switch, I know they're meant to be not taken seriously and compared directly. It's just kind of the extreme example I can think of just how in your life there are products you are going to buy and you are not going to do the full research on them, and that's just the way it is. And when that happens to products from the community I care about, I just have to remember that there are a lot of people out there who may purchase my product or may purchase a competitor's product, and they're not they just want something that works, and that they're not spending hours on forums to make sure that they're supporting the right people.
And that's totally fine. And as you say that, I'm looking around my office here and I'm like, I bet you the fan was a clone. I bet you, yeah, I bet you that, the plastic bin might have been a clone of a better bin. Like, you're totally right. But put some effort into the things that you
All of the
think
food I eat
might
is
matter.
clone.
And the more importantly, the opposite. Like I get a lot of people give me shit all the time for my views on banning and muting. And anybody that ever comes into my comments that goes, "That's bullshit. I'll wait for the Chinese clone," immediately banned. I don't care. That is the attitude of somebody who's a giant piece of shit. It's one thing going like, "Oh, look, there's light fixtures for 99 cents. I bet it's great. I'll buy those." But like there's another thing going, I'm going to intentionally go buy the clone thing because I don't want to spend the money to support the people that worked really hard on this. So yeah, I guess that's the better way to do it. Is just don't be that asshole that intentionally buys a clone when things are going to suffer as a result. You know?
Yeah, I was just thinking that all of the like most of the food products I buy are clones because I shop at Aldi pretty frequently, and everything there is just like reverse engineered food
Yeah.
items, like the Aldi version of
Yeah.
Dr. Pepper.
As we're talking,
And
I
I don't.
realized how
I always buy the
stupid that
legit Dr.
statement
Pepper.
was that I made about how I'm the guy that checks when I think it's important. So, and that's really it. Like I'm looking at like I wonder if my printer is a clone or not. I wonder. Oh, leg cramp. Ah. All right, we're back. I don't know if that was a sign from above that we needed to change subjects, but I got a leg cramp. It happens. It's one of the only remnants of back issues that I have. Doesn't happen often, but yeah. So that conversation was ended by what felt like me being tased in the leg. But so I guess that's the gods of retro telling us that we should move the fuck along onto the next subject. So,
Sure.
where the fuck has HD Retrovision been in the past 2 years?
Yeah, we have not been to convention in a while.
Even before
but,
lockdown, obviously.
Yeah, the convention thing in particular, I don't remember the last one I've been to. It's not like we're those kind of people where we have a YouTube channel and get invited. That seems to be like the big draws for a lot of places. So unless we like kind of actively reach out, we don't end up going. Yeah, I'd like to start getting back to some soon.
Not just where have you been, but what have you been up to, though? Because everybody, anytime I mention either of your name, anybody that knows you always asks how you are, because we're not all a bunch of just horrible retro gaming nerds that want hardware. But the next question, or if they don't know you, is where's our Xbox cables? Where's our Dreamcast cables? Where's any new product from you at all?
They're coming, assuming some of this part shortage issue can be sorted out. I don't know what. Yeah, it's really tough right now for people who are not paying attention to the situation. We've been spending, particularly Steve, has been spending a lot of time tracking down components that cannot be obtained right now.
So tracking down components to keep your two already released products in stock.
Okay. Both.
Because that's as much as we all love busting each other's balls, that is a perfectly reasonable answer. Is where have you been? Trying to keep the products we already released out on people's shelves and not out of stock. So that,
Yeah. So the part shortage like impacted even existing stuff. So actually just yesterday our warehouse in Chicago received a shipment of PlayStation and Wii and the extension and the mail-to-mail cables, but not the Genesis and SNES cables, which were supposed to be part of this shipment. We sat down with Ryan at the end of last year, spent a bunch of time just like forecasting out and placing orders strategically so that we'd constantly be stocked. And then, of course, this shit happens, and all of that time was a big waste. So we still have Genesis and SNES cables, fortunately, but the ones we expected to hit our dock a month ago have not not even finished being made because of having to hunt down parts. It's brutal, and not to like throw myself a pity party, but uh, I did tweet about one event through a reputable company where we placed an order for components in a very large sum of money, 5 figures worth of money, to basically secure that part for, like, I think we could forecast out like 3 years or something of orders. Like, we're just like, we don't want to have to worry about this because this is brutal. So, and plus, the more you order, the higher priority you are typically in these places. If you're just going to order 100, you're not going to.
Right.
No one's
They'll
going to
tell
care.
you to go to the
so we order a ton.
distributors and just pick them up at full price, and yeah.
So ordered this big quantity. I take a time out of my day to go to the bank and wire this money over to their account. A week or 2 weeks later, I forget how much longer after, we get notified that our order had been canceled. And we cannot get anyone to explain why this happened. Like, it's just, I mean, our best guess is that they promised they could do it at this price. We send the money over, and then they realize, oh shit, like, component prices have like gone away. We can't actually fill it at that price anymore. So they just tell us that they can't do it. That's a speculation. I don't have evidence because nobody will tell us anything. But anyway, they're sitting on this like large sum of money, and like, I have been spending like a week or two trying to get them to give us the money back, and I just keep getting the runaround. And finally today I complained about it on Twitter, and then magically I got an email like, hey, we'd like to help with that refund thing that you asked us about. I mean, this is really ridiculous. That's just one of two bad things that happened recently. The other one was we just like got scammed and lost a couple $1,000 by a company that said they had the parts, and they took the money and just disappeared. And later found out like this is going on like at big scale. There are some big actors doing this right now, to the like hundreds of millions of dollars have been stolen this way. If we were fortunate to get out for as
not
little as
only
we
are
did,
companies doing that, so I got to just interrupt you for a second. For anybody else making anything right now, I ran into a situation on a project where, you bought chips and like a bag of screws showed up, and I don't know what their end game is. Were they expecting you to just not know because you bought so many things that you're trying to remember? But the whole thing was negative feedback was left on the thing, and they contacted us and were like, could you please remove your negative feedback? This was an honest mistake. We've refunded you. I don't know what the problem is. And, I try not to be an awful person, so my heart kind of sank when I read that, and I was like, shit, it must be really hard for a distributor right now. Maybe they're trying their best. And I messaged a bunch of people, and everybody I messaged was like, fuck them. They did the same thing to me. They did the same thing to them. They did the same thing to them. Yeah. They know what's going on. It's been happening for months. So they're not only are there companies out there doing this on purpose, they're also trying to sob story you into continuing to not fight against them so they could rip off more people. Because I think the end game for this is wait till a bunch of people bring them to court and then disappear, just like we discussed at the beginning of this.
Yeah. So that's where we've been. So yeah, it sucks right now, but
So I know this just happened, but with the main distributor that ignored you until you put it on Twitter, was there actually money being sent back to you now, or are they just having a
That I don't know yet. I got a form that I need to fill out after this podcast that tells them where to put the money back, and then I'm supposed to send that to them. So it's not concluded yet, but at least I got a response finally.
All right. I keep us updated on that one, because that's one of those things where it's like it is very plausible that what happened was just they're dealing with this in a million different places, and they're dealing with the companies who spent millions that they have to cancel the order first. and then the companies that only spend
Mhm.
tens of thousands, they're dealing with second. Like it's very plausible.
Yeah.
But if it turns out that a bigger company like that's screwing you over, let's all have this conversation publicly. Let's just say.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So
Ouch.
we'll see. To be continued on
So
that.
I guess the one thing I'll ask then, and if you can't say specifics, I get it, but a lot of my friends now are working on projects knowing they're not going to be even potentially released until 2023 at the earliest. But all of these part shortages
Mhm.
that we're running into, you could still get one or two. A $10 part might be 60, but like in the context of developing something, it's not the end of the world. It sucks, but so I know a lot of people right now who are sitting on a couple of very cool projects knowing that once things come in stock, they'll redo whatever hardware is available then and then launch. So are there things that you're looking at now that you're considering that once part shortage ends you'll be able to work on, or are you still just kind of trying to keep stock of the existing and trying to get Dreamcast, Xbox out?
I mean, there's that, and then the HDMI stuff. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, Xbox is kind of an interesting case because there's not the same level of complexity as like a Dreamcast or Genesis and SNES cable. There's some cool ideas tossed around, but there's that whole project's just been on the back burner while we figure out kind of simultaneously how to keep Genesis and SNES cables being produced and getting Dreamcast produced. Um, but yeah, there's stuff on the horizon. It's just yeah, the part shortage is brutal, and we don't produce anything in quantities where like a hundred's
Yeah.
gonna cut it. A lot of these components, there's like three of them on the board, five of them on the board. So now all of a sudden you can only make 20, right? Like that's just not gonna work. And we're talking like bombs have like hundreds of parts on them too. So it's just yeah, it's kind of rough. And if you look right now at what these places are forecasting, I think 2023 is about right for when any of this stuff is going to stop being kind of jammed up, if we're lucky. Like there are parts we've ordered that have just said, they basically threw a token date of like back ordered until December 2022 or whatever. And you're like, all right, well,
There was
hopefully.
one project that I'm a part of that every once in a while I kept asking the person who's going to be doing the main test builds, because you can't just test one. You got, obviously every console has multiple motherboard revisions, and every couple of months they send me a screenshot of the back order list, and every couple of months it gets scarier and scarier, because at first you're like, oh,
Yeah.
more parts are in stock. Oh, that's cool, even more parts are in stock. But then you see like it's resistors and caps, and you go back and you look, and the chips that really are the important part, we're seeing 2024 on a couple of them on this one project.
Yeah.
So it's basically just like what are you going to do? Tell the person who did the original design, like, hey, that 1,000 or 2 hours that you spent on this, got to start from scratch on a new chip? Like, no, of course I would never ask anybody to do that. So it's like, well, it's on hold indefinitely until something comes back in that's doable.
Yeah, I mean, I really worry about companies just like having to close up shop because of this. We're fortunate to a degree that we have products that we can still make and kind of keep us afloat. If we did nothing else and just sold PS2 cables on Amazon, we could float it for quite a while. And we've been around long enough that we've saved up, some money in the company coffers to float us through some hard times. But people who are just starting out or don't have that kind of product that float them, that's a tough situation to be in. It's like when you're on low margin business, you can't just like not sell anything for 2 years because the ports are jammed up, and parts aren't being manufactured. So I mean, I feel really bad for a lot of these companies that are struggling with this.
Agreed. You mentioned the ports. Is that something that you've run into at all with your shipments, and that they're stuck at the ports for 2 months because there aren't enough people there to unload the or are you trying to do different things to get around that?
That's a good question. I would have to actually go back and look for when stuff left our factory and see how long ago that was from like yesterday when they delivered the shipment to our warehouse. Um, it may have been a bit longer, but I'm not 100% sure. I also don't know the exact route they take. They might not be taking that boat to like the Los Angeles,
I imagine a lot of people are
where the
intentionally rerouting because of that.
yeah, I could imagine that they're maybe driving it up to a different spot. I don't know.
Have you ever been to Hong
Um,
Kong or Shenzhen or any of those places where you see the mass transit of ships in there?
oh yeah, I mean, so I lived in Singapore for a bit, and Singapore has an
Mm-hmm.
awesome port um, that I actually was able to tour. And then Hong Kong, I've been there. It's really cool. Actually, in
The one in Hong Kong I've been to, and it was like staggering. Like you look
yeah,
at it from
it's
like
insane.
you could see it from the plane going in. Maybe depending where you're at, you could see it driving by like from afar. But then you get up like in the distance, it looks like Lego blocks, and then you get up close, and
Hmm.
you're just like, "Holy shit! Like this is something else right here."
Yeah, Singapore and Hong Kong both touch like an insane amount of the world's cargo.
Yeah,
Um, so their ports are just absolutely ridiculous and super cool to see.
yeah.
Um, I had a friend who was really into them and like specifically got his apartment in Singapore, like so that it was looking into the cargo ports. He could just sit and look at it all day and take pictures.
I miss having a view, man. I used to look out. I used to get like imposter syndrome every night. I would walk out onto my porch to have a beer or allegedly smoke a bowl, and I'd look over and I would just look at the New York skyline and be like, I shouldn't be allowed in this building. Now my view is of a pitch
Hmm.
black backyard with nothing else. But like, a buddy of mine also lives in New York and looks down at the Intrepid. So you see all those awesome
Hmm.
planes. Like little me would have just lost his mind if that's what you get to see every morning. And like, so yeah,
Hmm.
if I were your buddy, I would do that exact same thing too. Where it's like I want to see the weirdest, coolest shit ever from my window just by looking out it.
Yeah, that's. I'm actually in the process of moving out of here, and my biggest requirement for the place I go is like during the day, I want an awesome view of the mountains, and at night, I want to be able to see the Milky Way. Um, so that's kind of like the number one thing I care about is just having good views to sit and enjoy.
I gave up on the views, but having enough space to actually do my job is just wonderful.
Yeah, that spot looks
Yeah,
a lot better than where you were before.
yeah. I know I've told the story a bunch of times, so I'll make it quick. But when I was making the N64 video, one night, like I looked around and I had this weird moment of panic. I just walked out of my office. I closed the door. Woke up the next
Hmm.
morning, like went through my usual morning hate mail. Made some coffee, and then I went down and picked up right where I left off. And if I was in the city, that would have been hour of tear down, 2 hours of setup, so 3 hours of my life down the drain just because I lived in a shoebox.
Hmm.
And now I just get to be like, well, this is a horrible mess. But when I close this door, the mess disappears. I don't have to step over it to get to the bathroom in the middle of the night. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
as much as I miss that view and my friends and everything else, yeah, it is pretty cool.
yeah, having space is nice.
So, one question also that keeps coming up, circle back around to you, is that
Hmm.
you know I don't think anybody would be disappointed if HD Retrovision just stuck to making the fucking awesome cables you already make. And I'm not saying that because you're on the podcast. Anybody that's ever watched a Retro Roundtable episode knows that we're each other's harshest critics. I mean, I say it because I've done my own personal testing and proved it out. Maybe I'm biased because Steve taught me how to do a lot of my testing, but whatever. But are you originally, 10 years ago or whatever, talked about wanting to do stuff with HDMI as well? So are you, because of the part shortage and because of the crazy complexity and because of the, respectfully, because of the competition, are you just like, well, we're going to stick with analog cables because we do it really fucking well and, we know, we're safe here? Or are you still dipping your toes into anything HDMI related? And within reason, 2024, because you can't get shit before then or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I still think, like, assuming the company survives this nightmare and not too many more companies steal 40,000 of my dollars, then I think we still have plans to go down the HDMI route. It's definitely no secret that there are competitors now who have actually just like had time to do a lot of the things that we had originally sketched on a whiteboard and put on our website. But I don't know. We'll see how things shake out.
I'm super interested to see where you could go with this because we're just, this was not by design. I know all of these people. I consider all of them friends. It just so happens that the order in which these HDMI devices are being released and have been released, and that, yeah, they're competition because they're all scalers, but they're kind of not because, Mike ushered in the first generation or the first of the next generation scalers, the RetroTink 5X, and it's awesome. And you could buy one right now and it's going to be equally as awesome a couple of years from now. And then the OSSC Pro, I've had the pleasure of testing. And there's some very interesting things about that set it apart. There's going to be one that's better for some people than others, but or like each would be better for specific setups. So there isn't going to be one that knocks the other one off the pedestal. They're both going to exist and each be good at their own things, but also do a lot. And then of course the Morph is going to come out eventually, which, with all of the love and respect to that team, the part shortage is probably going to hit them really hard too. So who knows when that's coming out? Once again, that's not a dig. It is what it is with that shit. Yeah, and by the time that comes out, that's going to probably be the last one out. I'm sure none of those people are stupid, so they're going to be like, all right, well, what are the other two don't do so we could add to give somebody else? So it's going to be interesting to see, like, I've known you and Steve for a long time, and you look at things differently than everybody else. Steve's attention to detail is probably should require some medication. You're going to do something different. And I'm not asking what that is because I don't want you to spill any secret sauce, or maybe you haven't come up with it yet. But I'm certainly interested to see what you are going to come up with versus the other stuff out there. Because I think 2 years from now, or maybe less if the part shortage frees up a little bit, we're going to have a lot of different options at different price points that are all really cool and, can coexist. So the HDMIzer that you talked about in 2003 or whatever, I'm being facetious, but that's obviously not going to cut it today. And I don't think you'd be dumb enough to release that in the state that you designed it in 2016, I think. So I'm really interested to see what you guys come up with for that. That's your own spin on it.
Yeah, so I won't go into the details of features or anything like that. I will just say, I think, and this is not a knock on those guys because I really respect all their work, a lot of that stuff is really tailored towards this community. And I think, just as a general principle for us, we would probably take a broader view of trying to appeal outside of the retro gaming space.
It's a really good way to go about it. Us super nerds can get our stupidly complicated boxes that we want, and other people could just get something, you plug it in.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still stuff we want to do to that end, in terms of the advanced stuff. I mean, a lot of that stuff is kind of widespread now cool scan line options and all that stuff. But I don't imagine you would see an HD Retrovision product that was, anything like the OSSC in terms of menus, right? Like, we want a very consumer-friendly product that is still can do high-quality things.
And just a shout out to Marcus, because Marcus designs the products that the retro gaming community, the retro gaming enthusiast wants. So that's right. Actually a compliment to him too, because like the people who are like, I can't wait for the OSSC Pro want the super complicated menus, whereas you're not going to see
HD Retrovision have a product where you're adjusting the pre-coast.
Right. Steve would never allow that to happen.
Menu. It's just not going to happen. And not to say that there's not room for that stuff. We use that stuff for testing, and it's great for the super technical minded. We would like to make products that kind of appeal across a wider range of people to, like, as I said, the people at the convention who don't spend their entire day on retro gaming Twitter and watching your podcasts and know every detail.
Well, so. I mean, look, maybe this is the part of this long podcast that's going to get me sued, but that's exactly what Marseille did, in that they just took a product that anybody could plug in and use, and they dumped a lot of money into marketing it, and they dumped a lot of money into paying people to market it the way they wanted it to be marketed. I think that's a safe enough way to put it, so that there's thousands and thousands of people out there that see a product that you could just plug in and use. The difference is their marketing made it seem like this is the end all solution to all things. So I love the idea of that. I respect the marketing from like if you want to be a ruthless business person, that's how you do it. But I think HD Retrovision could do the same thing the right way. So, you could market it in a way where you're like, this is your plug and play device. There's 3 switches. Choose your color, like whatever, your advanced menu, hold this button down and, press this button on the remote. And then you could nerd out if you want to, but this is the 3 switches. Like I think you all could probably come up with a version of that dare I say, actually works. Yeah, that's what's going to get me sued. That's it. Talking a horrible shit for the first hour and 20 minutes, I was safe.
I think you're allowed to not like products, and if you're referring to the I don't know what you're referring to.
I'm referring to the M cable because I have hundreds of hours testing the M cable. So that's why if they took me to court, I'd be like, here is all of my footage. Would you like me to recapture this in front of you right here in court to prove that it's mostly bullshit? But
yeah, I mean, okay, so I think you sent me one of them, and I somehow got the other one, the cinema one and the gaming one. And for the life of me, I could not make out what the difference was, but maybe I'm blind. I don't know. I don't really want to crap on other companies.
Well, I got to say, on the flip side of things, right? I have seen the scenario in which that stupid little dongle looks freaking amazing. And I like it. And in fact, other reviewers in those same scenarios didn't like it for very valid reasons. And I did. And I stood up and was like, hey, you're probably right. But to my eyes on my TV, this looks awesome. My problem with them is the same with my problem with a lot of other companies. And if they marketed it as, hey, sometimes this thing's a game changer, sometimes it isn't. Don't expect miracles, but here's the scenarios in which it's going to make a difference, and here's exactly what you need to do to get there, I would be flying their flag. I would be the idiot on YouTube holding up a signed copy of it saying how good it is. The problem I have is that people, just like you were talking about before, people that aren't in the loop, because you don't have to be. You shouldn't have to be. But people aren't in the loop, hear M cable, and they're like, oh, that thing's amazing. No, it's not. You just get suckered into their marketing, and the people they paid to market it for them. That's what pisses me off about it.
You know more than me. I didn't spend that much time. I just tried to find a DVD where I was like, this makes a huge difference, and I could not find anything.
Load up
where
your prototype Xbox HD Retrovision cables, and put them into any cheap analog to digital converter, and load up any 720p native game, and you'll go, holy shit, this thing actually works. This is awesome. Like that. And I haven't tested too much with PS3, but I imagine a ton of PS3 games. Set your PS3 to 720p, plug it through this, and it's awesome. And the other thing, I think it was John Riggs. I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong, but he took the TurboGrafx Mini or the PC Engine Mini, whatever it is, and he put it in retro mode and plugged it into his TV, and it integer scaled. It doubled it to 1440 or something. So it actually was the opposite. It was really sharp and really good. But that's what I mean. If there was just a list of exactly the correct use cases and how to get there, it's an awesome product. But that whole like, oh, that's really cool that you spent 3,000 hours designing this. How does it look with the M cable plugged in? Oh, how about you go fuck yourself? It's like, you know, sorry, I'm biased. You know, that's it. Well, that's it. Bob's canceled. Marseille's going to sue me. Same way they threw me off their booth in Portland.
It's all good. Hey, can we answer some Twitter questions? I solicited some.
We have to.
Yeah, just a couple. So this one comes from Scott Wozniak.
Oh, I know him.
He asks,
like in real life,
boxers or briefs?
Oh, boxers.
You're a boxer boy?
All the time.
I kind of always pictured you as a tighty whitey man.
Really?
And I have spent a lot of time picturing you in tighty whities.
No, I've been boxers since 7th grade, and I'll tell you the story why afterwards, but that's still a little embarrassing to tell publicly.
I'm straight down the middle. I'm a boxer brief man.
I've tried one or two. They were interesting. I liked it. Not as good as boxers.
Yeah, I don't know. Boxers is a little too freeing. It's unsettling. All right, let's see. Paul Testman asks, is the N64 really as shitty a console as certain notable retro personalities say it is? I don't know who they're referring to. I know Voltar always makes fun of it.
No, they're making fun of me. And
yeah, okay.
It's the same as everything else retro. There are people that look at it through rose-colored glasses, and there are people that appreciate it for all the very cool things that it could do. And I just had a weird relationship with it from day one. So I just remember in high school, somebody getting it and me going over their house, and the camera was never quite right in the right angles and the low-res graphics. You're staring at something like, am I supposed to be looking for that, or is that a glitch? So, you know, I've always had mixed feelings about it, but I very much respect it for what it was. And more importantly, we couldn't have a Switch if there wasn't an N64 to start out with. But as far as playability today from somebody that's never touched it, like if you're like in your 20s and you've never touched an N64, I don't think you're going to like it.
Yeah, like if you don't have that the nostalgia goggles, as I saw someone use that term today, if you don't have those, I don't think N64 is going to be your jam. Although I will say, if you could play an N64 on a CRT, and if you can stick to certain genres of games, like first-person shooter is not the genre to, like, it's as amazing as GoldenEye was at the time.
It's not now.
It's not the genre to go back to because you're just way too used to how good FPS feels now, right? So, you know, leave that in the past for what it was. But like the RPG stuff on N64, like Ogre Battle, dude, that game's still awesome.
Yeah.
It's really fun to play. So
yeah,
you know, just it depends.
I still like Mario Kart. You know.
Yeah.
I know it's a cheesy answer, but it's the truth. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one.
All right, last question.
Uh-oh.
Given the cost and labor of getting a PC Engine with the CD add-on and RGB, do you think Analog's Duo console will be the best way to experience the system?
Despite not being original. So here's my very strong opinion on this. And people always get this wrong, and people just love to shit on me, which is fine. I actually appreciate when my friends shit on me. When strangers do, you could all fuck right off. But I don't hate Analog. I've never hated Analog. They're cheesy marketing where they announce an announcement to announce the flyer of a product that's coming out next year, maybe, is what pisses me off. But they make great products. And if original CDs and original hue cards are important to you, it might very well be the best way to play it. And I genuinely mean that. But if you're asking what's the best way to play PC Engine and TurboGrafx games, it's got to be the Mister, because you don't have to worry about anything. And in fact, I know a lot of people who for years were like, I need to RGB mod this, I need to, add all of these region-free enhancements. They're all switching to, I want my console recapped so it lasts forever. I want to make sure all of my original cue cards and CDs, or for whatever, cartridges for your consoles work. That's important to me, but I'm going to play them on the Mister whenever I play it on the RGB monitor or an HDMI or something. And they still leave the original experience with composite out and all that stuff. But so the best way to experience that, I'm going to have to quote our Lord and Savior Artemio and say that the best experience is the best way for you. But if you're talking about the best quality experience, as far as audio and video quality go, if you don't care about original ROM or original carts or ROMs, Mister, if you do want original stuff, then yeah, analog, totally.
Yeah, I mean, I resonate very strongly with the Artemio quote there. For me, the best way to play a Sega Genesis is always going to be an original Sega Genesis with a real cart and not a ROM cart.
Hooked up to a Zenith TV with a wad of wires in your jet.
Yeah, that's right. But for the Duo, which I never had as a kid, I have no attachment to that console. I don't own any games for it yet. But I'm still someone where I appreciate hardware. I think the Analog Duo is the first, well, I don't know which one's going to come out first, the Duo or the Pocket, but one of those two would be the first analog console that I really want to own. I don't have a Mega SG or a Super NT because those things have zero appeal to me. If I wanted the ROM situation, I would just go with a ROM card or Mister, but really I want to play on Unreal hardware for those.
Well,
with
Chris
the Duo
is very clearly doubling down on that because all of their marketing now the past month has been, we don't support ROMs. We're here for the people with original carts, which it's just more of the marketing bullshit that drives me crazy. But he's got a point though. He's absolutely has a point.
Those jailbreaks were not his company.
The unofficial jailbreak, okay. Fuck off. Yeah. Somebody randomly hacked their software within a day and a half now. But I get it. Once again, respect for the marketing, respect from that side of the marketing, and that he's right. He should be spinning it as, if you have a wall of games that you want to use, the analog products are awesome. But the one thing I'll say about the Duo that stands out from the others is it kind of sort of resembles a Duo, an original.
Yeah, it's cool.
And that's the thing that bugged me about the other two, is it didn't look like my Genesis or Super Nintendo. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to display it. I don't care. Stick it in the drawer.
Yeah, if I could get my hands on one of those, I definitely will, and I'll probably start picking up a Hue card collection because I think that'd be fun. But if not, I'm not going to rush out to get a Mister Duo setup going because I don't know. As cool as that stuff is, I hate menus of games. Right.
So this was. I was going to say this was fun, but this was actually, the first part was really depressing. So thank you for bringing me through that, Mustache. Glad I didn't have to do that on my own. I would have gone off on a tangent and just sound like a whiny, unappreciative ass. So thanks for walking me through.
I mean, I don't think, maybe you felt it was more depressing than I did. I think there's some, it's good to tell that story so that whoever does hear this and hadn't thought about it before, just reconsiders.
But I'm also the one being attacked about this publicly. There's also groups of people saying including the clone companies themselves, I'm a conspiracy theorist who's making things up for attention. And it's like, there's screenshots and admissions posted online by the companies I've talked about admitting to doing this, and then they're changing their tune and saying I'm lying about it. So it's double depressing because I really am out there fighting for everybody else. I just also don't want to be shit on in the process. And a good person wouldn't. That's why I know I'm not a good person. I know I'm not a bad person because I'm not a clone company that steals people's designs and lies about it. But a good person would be like, no, I'm doing my best, so that's fine. I'm not a good person. I'm like, fuck you. You should burn. You're a clone company, and you're lying about me. So yeah, it was double depressing because I'm seeing people getting stolen from, and I'm the one somehow taking the heat for it. So yeah, it is super depressing for me.
Well, it's a service that is well appreciated. That you get to take the heat for everybody else, so that we don't have to deal
I
with
had
it.
somebody, I had very genuinely and with love and respect in their heart say that my real job is to eat all the shit in retro gaming. and and I know, like, I'm paraphrasing a bit, and they meant it with love, but they're basically like, you got to be the one that stands up and talks about this stuff because it's really easy to just put a smile on your face and only talk about the good stuff. It's not very easy to stand there and be like, that's actually not true. Here's what really happened, and take the repercussions. And there's been a couple times where people tried to cancel me, and when it first started, I was like, oh, I got nothing to worry about. No one's ever dumb enough to believe that. And like 3,000 messages and, all this other crap later, I'm like, wow, they're winning. This sucks. I didn't do anything wrong. Like, if anybody knew what I knew, they'd be like, yeah, you did the right thing. But yeah, yeah, sorry, this wasn't supposed to be a pity party for me. This was supposed to be a pity party for everybody that got cloned. But yeah, maybe blame the three. Here we go. I'm going to blame Allagash North Sky Stout. It's only 7.5% alcohol, so it's not like those times where I was drinking, 11.5 and I was tipsy after 3. But
I've got a couple of like 15%ers in my fridge.
wow, are they like bourbon barrel type of thing, or?
Yeah, yeah, the Goose Island bourbon barrels that I've been aging for. Well, the one in my fridge is from 2016.
Oh wow, really? Is that a thing? Do you age bourbon barrel beer?
These you do. So usually every Thanksgiving when they release them, I pick up a bunch, drink some, and then I just like cellar because you're supposed to, they age up to 5 years. So I buy enough so that I can age one for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And so now I'm coming up on the 2016, which is the oldest one I have.
So what makes you decide to crack one of those open?
Yeah, you got to be in the mood because they are real bombers. It's not like a beer where you're gonna pop open 3 of them in a sitting. You'll be
right. Well, but here's context, right? When I was a kid, maybe 20, 21, something like that. Probably not legal drinking age. I went to something, wedding, whatever, and they gave us little mini bottles of champagne. And in my little poor kid's brain, I was like, champagne? That's fancy. I'm going to save this for a fancy occasion. And I did wait till something where I was like, hey, we should celebrate. Oh, I have that mini bottle of champagne. But, it's a mini screw top bottle of champagne. A year later, it was just like rubbing alcohol. It was gross. We had to throw it out. Like me, who never weighs out, like I had to throw that out. And it's like, so what's the deciding factor? Is there like oh, hey, this is like the best steak I've ever had. Let me go grab the 2018 bourbon barrel because it'll pair perfectly. Or are you just like...
Yeah, it's more just a mood for like, when the weather gets colder and, feeling like a heavy dark beer. That's what I'll go for.
I always feel like
that's really it.
Martin from Denmark, the guy who designed the 68X clone, sent me a bunch of beer in a BVM flight case. It was one of the funniest, nerdiest things I've ever seen. And he sent me that. He sent me a porter, Dracula candy, which was like licorice with licorice powder candy, and a couple other Belgian beers or beers from Denmark that were like, I guess Belgian style would be kind of fair for at least one of them. And I guess he thought he was like messing with me. And I was like, well, these 2 beers were very good. I really appreciate the gesture, but the dark porter was amazing. And he's like, really? I never would have thought an American would have liked that. And I was like, and the candies were neat too. And he's like, no way. Nobody likes those candies. No Americans do. I'm like, I'm weird. Like, whatever, that's fine. But yeah, dark beer, it's my favorite. And nobody else likes it. All the hipsters with with pants so tight they could even wear your boxer briefs. They they just like that super hoppy stuff.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of like the extremes in flavors anymore. Like I like a nice IPA, but like the San Diego, triple hopped, your eyeballs start melting. Not really my thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I never liked it. I still, the only things I don't like anymore are like super sweet drinks. Like I loved Sambuca as a kid, which hey, that's probably a shitty thing to say, but it's the truth. When I was like 16, maybe even 15, like I loved Sambuca. Like I haven't been able to drink that in a long time. I always loved Jaeger. I still kind of do, but it's just being 40 and ordering a Jaeger. It's like, oh, what are you gonna do? Are you here to roofie a 21-year-old? Like, stop talking, you fat old man. So I stopped drinking that a long ass time ago. The other, like, I still like the same stuff. The only thing I lost my taste for is super spicy stuff, and I think that's because I had too much of it, and then I paid the price a lot with my stomach. So it was like, Ghost, like ReTV. I had no idea who they were, but at Retro World Expo, like the moment the expo started till the moment it ended, they turned it up to 11. There were like people with maracas and like, they were everything. Like it was like a hype party times 11, and they were right next to us. And at first, I got to admit, I was like, is this shit going to happen all weekend? But like they were hyping everybody up. So after a while I was like, all right, I'm actually loving this. And they did the one chip challenge where you put like all the hot sauce on it and everything, and I was just like,
oh, that's different. There's actually a product you can buy on Amazon, a company that does the one chip challenge, and they literally send you a box for like $8. It's like this insane chip.
I think that's what it is.
And you're supposed to, it doesn't have any sauce or anything on it.
No, it's baked
like a
into
dry
it.
chip.
Yeah, it's a dry chip with the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. You got to see how long you can go without water.
Yeah. I 5 years ago, I would have won that. And I'm not bragging. I'm just like, it is what it is, right? Like and I saw that shit happen, and I was just like, I'm not doing that. I looked at Beast, and Beast was like, I'm not doing it either. Just like, all right, good. It's not just me. But yeah, 5 years ago, I would have done that. And what's funny is, I'm Eastern European, so like mild salsa and my face turns red, but it's not too hot. It's just my natural reaction. So I would have bit into that, and my face would have turned purple probably. And my eyes would have started watering, but I would have been laughing through the whole thing. Like, this is really hot. This is pretty funny. And then, what goes up must come down. It ruins everything down. And do that too much. So, can't do that anymore.
Yeah, no thanks, man. Not for me anymore.
If you're chasing yourself around the house with chapstick duct taped to the end of a selfie stick, your life has gone wrong. Dude, I said that one time, and somebody looked me dead in the eye and were like, did you really put chapstick on your butthole? And I'm like, it's a metaphor. Like, what, do you really think I would get chapstick and use that? Like, yeah. So no, I didn't actually.
You think it really would require the use of a selfie stick?
Right. How fat do you think I am? Especially if you're standing in front of me. Sitting here, I could be hiding a massive gut, but if you're standing in front of me, I don't need an appendage to get to my butt. Come on. Ugh. Well, on that note, I can't think of a better way to end this.
Yeah.
I can't think.
Great way to end it.
Just a depressing podcast ending in my butt. So, thank you for doing this, Nick. Next time, I swear I'm gonna pick the happiest topic on the planet, and so
Sounds
you don't
good.
I don't have to drag you through the mud for this one. But thank you for your insight and all of this, especially a couple of times where you brought everything back on track to keep things on topic. Like, it was very important. Thank you. I appreciate it very much. Hopefully people listening do too.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so don't buy clone products. And that's about it.
And don't eat spicy chips.
Unless you know what's going to happen next and you're prepared to deal with that.
Yeah. Unless you have chaps.
Later, dude.